Hello and welcome to Straight Talk, Supply Chain Insights, the podcast for your supply chain leader who is on the go and wants to be in the know. And now, your host, Laura Ciceri.
Welcome to Straight Talk with Supply Chain Insights. My name is Laura Ciceri. I'm the founder of Supply Chain Insights, and this podcast is designed for the supply chain leader who's on the go but wants to be in the know. In this podcast, I interview business leaders and technologists to understand what drives them, what the value propositions are, and to get some insights. Today, I am interviewing Jett from Project 44. Jett, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on the show today.
Talk a little bit about yourself. How did you get to where you are to build Project 44?
Oh, that's geez. I feel like it's a big question, also a small question. Like many people, I'm the sum of many parts and many experiences that's been propelled and elevated by a lot of amazing folks in life that helped out along the way and sponsored me and mentored me all the way from early years, in middle school and high school, at least as far back as I can remember, to first jobs. I guess how it's related specifically to supply chain, which of course builds off some of those experiences, goes back to Roadway Express in 1999 in Portland, Oregon, and responding to a job in a newspaper, because that's how we got jobs back then, for $15 an hour for a dock worker. And somehow I got convinced that, because I had a little bit of management experience working at a bike shop in high school, that I should become a manager at Roadway Express instead of a dock worker. So instead of $15 an hour like I applied for, it was $12 an hour. I think it worked out well. I had a lot of jobs along the way at asset carriers, 3PLs, consulting firm I owned, started, and eventually just saw patterns over and over again, and thought there's kind of reoccurring themes that I really wanted to solve, and the only way there was to solve them would be with technology.
What were the reoccurring themes that you saw, Jett?
The first day in 1999 was answering the phone and telling, I was in Portland, Oregon, and back then Nike, Columbia Sportswear, Bowflex, they ship products. And my job was to answer them, tell them what the ETA was for the truck. And, I remember I looked over at my boss like the first day and I said, hey, we have this internet thing at school. Do you think we could connect their system and our system and communicate this information? And he says, shut up, kid, keep answering the phone and tell everyone the truck's going to be there in 15 minutes. And we got a chuckle on that, but there was just these themes that went over and over again, which was really information asymmetry between these different parties, the carrier, the 3PL, the shipper, the consignee. And so I became more and more interested as my career progressed on how can we solve that information asymmetry? And if you could solve that information asymmetry, there's the outcomes that can be created, and the efficiencies are almost endless.
And you were a pioneer and an innovator, putting things together. Project 44, tell the group a little bit about how did you come up with that name and when did you start the company?
The company, I believe, is probably 11 years old, maybe coming up on 12 years old. I wasn't full time until almost 2 years after I started it. I had a number of other companies. I was trying to see if this would even get traction. I thought there was a need, and I got inspiration from other industries that were adjacent, like travel and fintech, but it was unclear if it would work out in logistics and supply chain. But the name itself came from our office was in Chicago. I say our office. We rented a closet from my consulting firm, literally a closet. Big closet though, and we were able to get like 2 desks in there. And one night, I thought, I don't want to name it logistics or something else like everybody else names everything, has logistics in the name. And I walked out at like 2 a.m. one night and I looked up at the street sign and it said Route 66 historical, like ends here. And I didn't know a ton about that. And so I started checking into it, and Route 66 connected from Chicago to LA, and a lot of things were transported. Well, as we started importing more and more in the country, and trucks were bigger and faster, Route 66 couldn't support that. So it was replaced. A lot of it was replaced by the physical infrastructure of Highway 44. And of course, that was called Project 44 when they were building it. And I thought, well, we're doing the same thing. We're replacing the digital infrastructure with something more modern. So we named it that.
Great story. I remember talking to you when you were first starting the company. I didn't realize you were in a closet, even though a big closet. And I've never met entrepreneur, innovator who had more passion about doing what you were doing. How
Mm.
did you build the company? Because it's truly a global company. And if I look at the scale, 11 years, I mean, it's incredible how much you've grown. How did you do it? And what are your insights?
It certainly wasn't perfect. There's a lot of learnings that are along the way. As we sit here today, you're right, it is global. Those are some of the challenges, but also some of the tailwinds with it. It is the largest generation two logistics like SaaS tech company in the world, whether you measured it by ARR or shipments or data, customers, things like that. However you wanted to measure it, it would always end up on top. And the way that we grew globally was a combination of organically and inorganically. Back then, we used to think about three main vectors of growth. You could grow geography, mode of transportation, and then what capabilities across the part of the workflow. And we started out as LTL, really across the entire workflow. And then we moved into truckload, and we wanted truckload also to be across the entire workflow. That's here domestically in the US. The truckload carriers just weren't sophisticated enough back then. And at the same time, the Obama administration had kind of given a gift of requiring ELDs, which lended themselves really well for visibility, and companies seeing that that's kind of the spot where they wanted to start first. I think we got some traction there. There were a number of other companies that we were competing with in that space, and all good companies. But I think the big kind of breakout move, there's a couple, but the first one was we acquired in Europe. I didn't know much about Europe. I'd only been to Europe once in my life prior to this particular business trip, but I knew that we needed to be in Europe. We had started to get into global customers, whether it was someone like DSV or some shippers like ABB early on. And they wanted the same experience they were having in the US, they wanted it in Europe. And when I went there, obviously it's a continent, things move quite a bit differently than they do in the US. And so we acquired the number one data as a service company called Gatehouse Logistics out of Denmark. And I think that was a really big step with us being global. It was a bit of a bizarre move. We were probably only 5 million in revenue back then. So making an international acquisition was very atypical. But that was a big milestone.
You know, the holy grail is ETA and reliability around ETA and using outside in data, which has proliferated a lot in transportation to improve reliability. What have you learned in that journey?
I would say we've learned quite a bit on that, and hopefully we're still learning. ETAs are quite complicated for a number of reasons that I think are often misunderstood. If you buy something on Uber Eats or DoorDash or something, or Amazon, oftentimes people say, well, why can't it just work that easy? And the reality is if you unpack that, you're usually looking at some type of like vertically integrated solution where, the asset is controlled or managed by the software, and it's like a single experience. When you're building and so it's like through some application, and so it's relatively easy in that sense, and the distances are rather short, and oftentimes it's very known, it's point A to point B, or with a stop that's predefined, with very predictable things. When you start moving into like say cross country truckload or LTL, the number of variables increase quite significantly and become much more complicated. When you're looking at ocean ETAs, you enter another layer of complexity. These ships are large. If you look at today, you have a lot of geopolitical things that can even disrupt them quite significantly. Ships can go on routes that you have almost no, like when the Red Sea happened, there's very, very little data to train the models on how long it would take. And would these ships even have the appropriate amount of fuel to pull in or to make it to their final destination, or would they need to pull into ports along the way? And if they pulled into ports, would they have enough fuel and enough supply chains to actually refuel these things? So each one of these is a new learning experience. And then I think we have those modes mastered now, those kind of single modes with extremely high degrees of accuracy, no matter how we're getting the data from the carriers. When you move into like calculating ETAs from freight forwarders, the level of complication gets significantly higher, especially if you're talking a door-to-door move or multimodal, because oftentimes these freight forwarders are providing information actually out of sequence of how the events are happening. And then, of course, if you're doing a true end-to-end, something inland China to a doorstep, and it's going through maybe half a dozen or a dozen and a half different companies, and at the point of ship, it's often not even understood, will it go on a rail, or what ship will it actually make it on at the port of loading, or when it's what rail line will it go on when it's at its destination, or will it go on a truck with a team. These are significantly more complicated. I think what we learned in that process is that something is better than nothing. We learned that most companies have very inaccurate lead times in their planning process that leads to a lot of inventory bloat. And then I think at different parts of the organization, when we're talking about BCOs or shippers, that there are different sensitivities to ETA accuracy to drive outcomes.
You've done a lot of work with transportation, but most of the clients that I have that are in other parts of supply chain don't really know how to use your data, right? They want to use your data. They feel like it should be helpful, but they don't really know how to get started. What would you tell them?
Well, of course, they can call us or call you. I think you actually have one of the most insightful ways of how something like Project 44 could be leveraged. But I think the best way to do is just engage and start to find out like what is available. I think there's significantly more data available to help solve problems for customers. That's probably one of the challenging things that we have at Project 44, and we're at that inflection point right now. Is how do we productize what some of the most innovative companies in the world have done, like Ford and Elcon and companies like this that have taken our product and taken maybe a combination of products and had some really transformative things. And every business is slightly different. And so how can we productize that? And what I find now is that even if it's in the same vertical, we have customers in all verticals: life sciences, auto, tier one suppliers, retail, e-commerce, CPG. Even within those segments and even direct competitors, they're often very much different. And so unfortunately, like where we are right now, it typically involves some type of engagement to connect with them and find out what their goals are, and then find out if it's something that our platform can solve for them. And there's a lot of variables too, like what are their technologies they have and what are their capabilities.
You've taken that work that you've done on ETA and reliability of shipping and started to build new forms of TMS. Can you tell the group a little bit about that vision?
I built a number of TMSs across my career. There are some of them are still functioning or in their relative shape. What I noticed with them, or maybe it was the inspiration of Project 44 early on, is that there are just a couple main challenges and problems. One of the big ones was connecting to the carriers was always a very long pull, and most TMS implementations were abandoned or not fully ever completed. Maybe they had ambitious things, and by the second or third year, fourth, fifth, things start to cancel. And so as we started to move in, we had a lot of TMS functionality actually initially when we started in 2014. And as we kind of got pulled into visibility a lot, it became this really strategic weapon. But now as we're going over to upstream in the logistics cycle into the TMS, we're taking that visibility data and fixing the problems that a lot of these TMSs have. For example, like I mentioned, the carriers, onboarding them, the carriers are pretty much already all onboarded in our system. And whatever carrier is not, everything's click, not code, and can be done with an administrative person. Implementation setup, like these are very complicated things in a traditional or legacy TMS. Like we've taken all those friction points out. Also in TMSs, they could be very like process heavy, but they're very data poor. And so because we have all this visibility data, we can take the bias out of all those upstream decisions, like which carriers are the most reliable, what carriers should be considered, what's the ETA accuracy going to be, what sailing schedules are going to happen, what's the congestion at the terminals and the ports. So you can really do real vendor optimization, mode optimization, and including a nice set of things like, based on tariff and pricing. So I think that's That's the big thing. I didn't want to just build another TMS for the fourth or fifth time, depending on how you counted it. I wanted to really build that next generation intelligent TMS. And so, like I said, we've had a lot of these features separately, kind of a la carte, and now we just packaged them all together a few months ago and took it to market.
What's been the market reception, Jett?
I think it's been really, really strong, generally speaking. We just we beat a few of the large TMSs, established traditional legacy TMS, whatever you want to call them. Some pretty meaningful head-to-head deals at our ICP, ideal customer profile, which is the Global 2000. I think those were for the ones I'm just mentioning. Those are for net new TMSs, companies that hadn't invested in TMSs. Our TMS is interoperable with an existing TMS investment. And it's been really receptive there too, because so many of those TMS projects are somewhat abandoned or stopped. Because if you think about it, you have TMS has capabilities, then you have geographies, and you have business units. And so it's really unusual for me to go into a Global 2000 shipper and find a TMS that's set up for all business units, all TMS capabilities, domestic, ground, execution, optimization, planning, RFP, everything that's there, and also for all geographies. And so we fit really nicely that we can play with those investments that have been used or invested in, and then add in a layer of intelligence that's not there, or that blank canvas where no one's made that investment. I'm pretty optimistic about it. I think it'll be a big part of our future. It ties really well into our larger picture, which is the decision intelligence platform. There's 4 product families in there: TMS, visibility, yard management, slot booking, and e-commerce experience, where I'd say that we've been pleasantly surprised so far.
Well, Jett, I'm going to give you a little chance to brag. I remember that call I had 11 years ago, and you were a hard-pressing, very, very inspired innovator. And now you have a company and it's global. Tell the group a little bit about where you're at in terms of number of employees and reach, and brag a little bit for me.
The results are, the really just from what the customers who believed in us and the team members that put the blood, sweat, and tears in, the investors that backed us, and influential people like you who take the time out and allow us to tell our story. I used to measure, and I don't know why, but I used to think like a head count or something was something of interest. We have, I think now, about 578 people. My goal is that it never gets over 600 again. And it was significantly higher than that at the high water mark. Revenue wise, like I said, we're well over 100 million. If you took our kind of direct competitors and the Magic Quadrant and you added them all up, would have more ARR than than those folks combined. That's like on the visibility side. On the TMS side, we certainly are big enough to qualify for, say, like a Gartner or Magic Quadrant. Also, but I think really it's just really more about like the impact. It's the world's largest logistics data graph in the world, and I think as we go into a lot of these advancements in AI, there's 2 things that are really, really important as we're starting to see these models. I wouldn't say stall, but if we're seeing some questions about what are the capabilities without feeding in more data. And so the things that we have that are interesting is that we have this huge data set, but we also have the context. And I think that's what's going to like propel us into the future, is that yes, we have AI agents and voice and messaging and a lot of AI throughout the product in variable spots, but that context and that data is huge. So to give you an idea, I haven't checked in a while, but last time I checked, it was over 4.6 million unique shipments a day, which nobody has that. I guess maybe UPS or FedEx would have something, but that's one mode with inside their thing. Nobody has that across the entire system. In addition to that, we also have a graph architecture, which allows for agentic outcomes to happen at specific tenant levels. So let's just say the things I'm most excited about and proud of as we go to this next chapter.
Well, Jett, I'm awfully proud of you and the team, and building outside-in processes that can help us with improving reliability. Any last thoughts before we close today?
I appreciate the opportunity of being here. Thanks to anyone out there that supports and cheers for us. It means a lot to the team and just a lot of gratitude. So thank you.
Thank you, Jett. Until next time, this is Straight Talk with Supply Chain Insights, an interview with Jett from Project 44. Thank you.